Hello everyone, my name is Ruben Romero.
I'm Valeria del Campo.
Hello, everybody. My name is Diana Escobedo.
I'm Jessica Hoffman.
And we are here to talk to you about obsessive compulsive disorder, also known as OCD. So before we talk about what is OCD, we want to make an important comment. We live in a world in which OCD seems to be very common, or that's what actually people tend to believe. But there's actually only around 2 to 3% of the world population that are actually diagnosed with OCD. Yes, of course, there might be a little more because of stigma, people not wanting to go to the doctor and be diagnosed. But there's actually a very big difference of being a perfectionist and actually having OCD. So let's say, for example, liking things to be done a certain way, organizing your pantry in a certain way, liking your room to be clean. It doesn't mean you have OCD. It's just daily rituals that you have. But the big problem with this is that OCD has been romanticized because of like social media, influencers, and celebrities making fun of the idea of having OCD and making it a joke. But as future and current healthcare providers, we need to be part of the movement that changes this and make sure that we see OCD as a mental health disorder and we pay its dues to it.
So according to the National Health Science, also known as the NHS, OCD is a mental disorder in which a person has obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors. Before we talk more about symptoms, manifestations, and overall stats of OCD, we want to make sure that people know exactly what obsessions and compulsions are. Obsessions are ideas, visions, and urges that keep happening and feel uncontrollable to the person. OCD patients do not wish to experience these ideas and find them to be unpleasant. Most of the time, OCD patients are aware that these beliefs are absurd. Obsessions frequently come with strong and unpleasant emotions like terror, disgust, anxiety, and doubt, as well as a sense that everything must be done exactly so or perfect. And obviously, this will vary from one individual to another. Obsessions in the context of OCD can take up time and interfere with meaningful pursuits or interests that the individual cherishes. This final point is crucial to remember since it helps to establish if a person has OCD, a clinical condition, or just an obsessive personality trait. Compulsions are recurrent actions or ideas used by a person to oppose, neutralize, or make their obsessions disappear. OCD patients are aware that this is only a temporary fix, yet they rely on their compulsions because they lack other coping mechanisms. Avoiding events that cause obsessions may also be a compulsion. Compulsions take up time and prevent a person from engaging in meaningful things that they value.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to note that now, all recurrent actions are actually considered compulsions. This all depends on the behavior's context and function. Simple actions like your bedtime rituals, religious observances, or even working out at a certain time of the day, they all entail some degree of repetition of an action over and over again, but they're often good and useful for your everyday life. They help you function and create your schedule and your routine daily to get stuff done.
So once an individual is actually diagnosed with OCD, their experience will vary greatly from one individual to another. But there are several great manifestations that an individual suffering from this condition can experience. As Ruben mentioned previously, this condition presents several obsessions and/or compulsions that individuals find will consume a lot of their time, and they may find that these actions are hard to control or ignore. Compulsions that an individual participates in are not done for pleasure, but they tend to relieve the anxiety or stress that the individual is experiencing as a result of their condition.
So symptoms of OCD can be very similar to those of mental health disorders such as depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, and others. So it can be really helpful to discuss your symptoms with an experienced professional to obtain an accurate diagnosis. Some people may feel compelled to look up things on the internet and self-diagnose, and while that is useful for certain situations like unavailability to professionals, it is important to reach out to an actual professional to be diagnosed so you can get the proper treatment.
Right.
It is important to note that on average, it can take around 17 years for an individual with OCD symptoms to receive treatment, which is a very, very long time. Some examples of obsession that an individual may experience include the fear of causing harm to others, the fear of making a mistake, experiencing constant feelings of doubt, needing a lot of reassurance, and more. Compulsion examples include but are not limited to bathing, washing your hands over and over to the point where there's cuts and dried skin, repeatedly checking things such as locks or switches, arranging things in a specific way, having rituals related to numbers such as counting or doing a task a specific amount of times, and more. The obsessions and compulsions that an individual experience can vary greatly, so it makes it more simple to define them by themes. Depending on the type of OCD, the individual can experience intrusive thoughts which can be based on fear, worries of contamination, and more.
So an actual common theme of OCD is checking rituals based and created by intrusive thoughts, which can take a major toll of the individual's mental health and have caused great feelings of worry. So for example, let's say if someone's driving through I-10 and they feel a certain bump, but they just start to feeling this intrusive thought that they ran over someone or something. They might have the urge of having to go back and drive through I-10 and make sure that they didn't hit someone or something, and they might do it multiple times. They might check social media, the TV, and news reports, making sure that there's not any news articles saying that there was an accident during I-10. They might even get to the point in which they park next to I-10 and walk and get outside the car, putting their lives at risk just to make sure that nothing happened. And another theme is the desire for things to feel just right, symmetrical, or perfectly organized. So for example, if a college student is writing an essay, they might be stuck in a paragraph and rewrite it over 20 times to make sure it's perfect.
So going on to what Ruben was saying about the themes, there are many different kinds of themes that can be observed in individuals suffering from OCD, and some people may even display multiple themes in their symptoms. In just a little bit, we will go into further detail about the exact kinds of OCD that there are and the symptoms that are specific to each one. There are also certain responses that an individual will experience when confronted with situations that trigger certain obsessions and compulsions. For some people, it could be constant anxiety that is accompanied by recurrent panic attacks. Other individuals may experience strong feelings of disgust. They can also experience feelings of incompleteness when participating in certain compulsions until things feel, look, or sound just right.
The symptoms of OCD usually begin appearing in adolescence, with a quarter of cases starting by age 14 and half by age 19, and it is uncommon for someone over the age of 40 to develop OCD. When these symptoms go untreated, they can become chronic, ranging in intensity of moderate to severe. I know some professionals who reach out to other people with OCD. They say that struggling with OCD very young is really, really hard for them, and it made them homebound and made them stuck in their houses for a very long time, and some doctors would just tell them that there's no help for you. But there is help out there, and they do get better over time, but usually these symptoms don't usually happen when you're older. They can also begin to take over someone's life due to the inability to concentrate, bringing about feelings of anxiety and avoidance. The symptoms of OCD can cause someone to be late for work or even struggle with getting ready for bed in a reasonable amount of time. The individual with OCD will often acknowledge that the symptoms are problematic but cannot do anything to stop them or resist participating in these compulsions. So if someone is experiencing symptoms that affect their daily life, they should speak to a professional to obtain help with their condition. The good news is that if treated, 7 out of 10 individuals will see improvement of their symptoms when being provided with treatment. However, OCD is known to be usually a very long condition with symptoms that come and go.
It is not uncommon for people to use everyday lingo and refer to some compulsions or obsessions that they experienced at one point. For example, double checking the stove or locks before leaving the house, but this is often used in casual conversation, and people often use terms such as obsessing or obsessed in a very, very casual manner. For example, some people might not, like, when they're trying to hang a picture up and it's not perfectly straight, they may say things like, oh, it's my OCD acting up, like it has to be super straight. But in reality, that's just the perfectionist side talk, speaking for them.
Because it looks weird.
So some people use it in just everyday language, and even though some individuals will partake in this behavior and use it in casual conversation, the obsessions that are a result of OCD are often very extreme and take up hours of the individual's day. The anxiety and distress that results from OCD can often disrupt their day, and the compulsions that individuals with OCD participate in are unwanted and uncontrollable, which is a large difference between casually checking on things and suffering from OCD.
And now that we have mentioned the common symptoms of OCD, it is important to mention that there are multiple types of OCD, we were going to talk about some of the most common, but it's not limited to this. So we have checking OCD, hoarding OCD, contamination OCD, symmetry and orderliness OCD, and intrusive thoughts OCD.
So checking OCD has to do with the compulsion of needing to check things over and over again with obsessive fear of damage or something bad is going to happen if they don't. This includes constant reassurance from a friend group or a loved one about how they feel about you, checking constantly to see if lights are off, car and or house doors are locked, rereading emails and letters or text messages to make sure you understand them and didn't make any mistakes, and or checking you don't have any sexually transmitted diseases. Hoarding OCD is when a person refuses to get rid of unwanted or worn out items. Hoarding disorder, long thought of as a form of OCD, was probably correctly reclassified in the 2013 release of the DSM-5 as a condition of in itself. People may confuse hoarding OCD with hoarding disorder, but the difference is that people with hoarding OCD hoard for very specific obsessive worries, fears, and should still be diagnosed with OCD rather than hoarding disorder. So hoarding disorders, they hoard for sentimental reasons, so especially if they have kids. They don't want to get rid of things that pertain to their growth of their childhood. But people with hoarding OCD do it out of fear and anxiety that they just can't let go.
Contamination OCD is the threat of being filthy and contaminated. Frequently, the worry is that contaminating oneself or a loved one would hurt them. This includes the avoidance of using public telephones, toilets, using scooters or bikes provided from the city, shaking hands, being in big crowds, and or having to remove clothes when they get to the smallest amount of dirt. So even people could go like a 7-8 hour shift or be at school, and I've heard of like people that I know that won't use the restroom in public, so they'll have to go home, and it completely disrupts their day due to the fear of like contamination and stuff like that.
Yeah, that actually sounds very similar. I don't know if you guys seen the movie Split.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So Split talks about this guy who has personality disorder, if I'm not mistaken.
He has DID.
Yeah, DID. And he has like 23 different disorders, and one of his is like,
Personality.
yeah, personalities. And one of his personality has OCD to the point where if he gets just his shirt dirty or someone else does like get their shirt dirty, he makes them take it off, and it affects them. Like it gets him angry.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just find it very interesting.
Yeah.
For sure. So when talking about symmetry and orderliness OCD, it's having compulsions of lining everything up just right with the obsessive fear of having things to be perfect so there is no discomfort and or harm. This includes having books and CDs lined up perfectly and sometimes even in alphabetical order, having clothes hanged correctly and sometimes color-coded, and having canned food items or drinks facing the same direction.
And the last type of OCD we're talking about is intrusive thoughts OCD, which is actually very different from just having normal intrusive thoughts, because let's be honest, we all have them. We all have the urge of adopting a dog, going for a run, buying a plane ticket to Europe and start to live there. But the big difference from this is that intrusive thoughts are actually very unpleasant, repetitive, and the majority of time they're actually very dangerous.
Right.
Examples include like not fully trusting your significant partner and thinking they're unfaithful and needing constant reassurance from them and just thinking that like they're not cheating on you, jumping in front of traffic when it's moving, doing very dangerous stunts, and even including like the need or the want of wanting to get in a fight constantly with someone. Let's say people in a bar or something, that they go and just want to go fight someone. And intrusive thoughts like about someone's like sexuality, who like they like, and what's right or wrong. But because of this last example, many people who may have OCD are scared of seeking help because they have the fear of being judged by their psychologist or their psychiatrist. So, and we won't be going more deep on examples since it can be a more sensitive issue, but we welcome you to go to the OCDUK.org website, and you can check it out for yourself.
Right. And so now that we kind of have more of an idea of what OCD really is and not what, we see like on social media or what someone claims that they have OCD and they're just a neat person. And we could see how critical it actually is, and it's not, such kind of like, my OCD or whatever. There's good news. It's very treatable. It doesn't really matter how severe your symptoms are. There's always going to be something for you. There's usually under the umbrella of mental health, usually there's always like two treatment options, which is like CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, is more what we know as like talk therapy, and medication as well, right? So it's the same thing for OCD. The first thing that they're gonna put you to do would be like the CBT. It's gonna teach you like coping skills, mainly because, like we mentioned previously, with OCD, it's basically you're doing rituals out of fear. So it's gonna give you skills to learn how to cope and dealing with like different issues that you may be focusing on. It also focuses on like your thoughts and beliefs and your attitude, and how it affects your feelings and your actions, which is mainly what OCD consists of. And that, like I said, it's the most common. If you go and you're looking for help for your OCD, they're gonna start you off light, and they're gonna recommend talk therapy. There's always great therapists out there that can give you the skills and advice that you may need. Then there are, like I said, medications that can be prescribed for patients that do need like the extra help, or with cases that are a little bit more severe. Like, for example, like what Ruben said, the example from the man from the movie Split, he obviously was not going to be sufficient with just like talk therapy.
Yeah.
He did need some sort of medications for it. The most typical medications that they prescribe are like antidepressants. Like I said, it's OCD is kind of under the umbrella of like depression and anxiety. They kind of join them a little bit together, and so they use the same medication for it. It's just like an antidepressant. It has to do with like the serotonin in your brain. I won't get into it, but usually, like I said, if it's really severe, they're going to combine the two. Mm-hmm. They're going to do like the CBT, which is like I said, the talk therapy, and they're also going to combine it with medications. And they also do exposure therapy. And I know that sounds really scary because exposure therapy has like this stigma, right, of being like super aggressive and like super old school. But with OCD, it's very effective, which I mean, you can kind of tell because they will kind of make you do what you fear and help you realize that like absolutely nothing is going to happen. So exposure therapy is actually very effective for people with OCD. I was actually reading and looking up case studies, and I read a study about an individual. He had a very severe case of OCD. It didn't start off as bad. It started off like doing like rituals, like before he opened a door, and like if he touched a doorknob with his right hand, he had to touch it with his left hand and do like these sort of rituals. It started off light. And throughout the years, I think he was like in his 30s. So like you said, you get it when you're young, and then, it's really hard to get it once you're older. But he was already in his 30s, so he's had it for years. Never really got any help. But it got to the point where he wouldn't leave his house. He was homebound. He couldn't even hug his mom because of intrusive thoughts. He had a lot of intrusive thoughts where he felt like if he went outside and a blue car passed by, like something was going to happen to his family. And it was just like little things like that, and it just like completely took over his mind. And like he wouldn't leave the house, he couldn't be around his family because he was so scared that something was going to happen to them. So he finally got help, and so because his OCD was so severe, he did have to be put into like an intensive 3-month program, like a rehab clinic for it. And obviously, like I said, they combined with medications, talk therapy, and exposure therapy. And from what I read, this specific case, I'm not saying it's like with everybody, but thankfully in his specific case, like right now, he's completely fine. He's still going to therapy just for like coping mechanisms and just like, I guess like a maintenance type of thing. But he's completely fine. Like he does not have any intrusive thoughts. He does not have any urges, any like rituals, and like he actually stays away from like routines just because he doesn't want it to become like
A ritual.
yeah. So he did make some like life changes and everything, but like now he seems to be okay. So it's not to say that that's the case for everybody, but it's good to know that it could either, you know, be well managed or even cured in some cases.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Well, building on what Diana said, OCD affects the daily life of individuals in many, many ways, especially familial, platonic, and romantic relationships. Because people with OCD experience persistent thoughts and urges against their control, it can interrupt their thoughts and make them feel anxious, frightened, and uncomfortable. Unwanted thoughts disrupt their ability to interact with others and make it hard to concentrate on work or school. So when they're at school, especially when they're younger, they can't do the things that normally other students can do. And it makes them afraid to speak about it because the teachers can get mad at them for it. And it just makes them shut down inside, and it just makes the symptoms worse. Furthermore, learning to manage stress and making lifestyle changes becomes an integral part to dealing with, like, someone with OCD has to deal with now. Before treatment, many often feel hopeless and frustrated when triggered, thinking that there is no hope out there and there's no way that they can get better. But treatment and support truly allows someone with OCD to live their lives to the fullest. Furthermore, because OCD sufferers have a heightened sense of fear and lack of security, these can manifest itself in the need for constant reassurance from their partner, making patience a very, very important virtue to have for both parties. Especially communication. When you are experiencing symptoms, it is important to communicate with your partner what you are thinking and what you fear. And then as the other person without the OCD, it is also important for you to discuss, like, it's not just, you can't just worry about everything that I'm doing. OCD can also make it hard to maintain friendships because of the fatigue they go through from experiencing symptoms, and for the same reasons related to romantic partners. I read that because it is so exhausting to have these symptoms and to continually like try to manage them, it is hard to try to put yourself out there and try to maintain relationships with friends. So friendships tend to die in the end, especially without treatment. Family members also may feel the need to deeply involve themselves in OCD rituals and take on all responsibility and care for daily activities with someone who can't do those daily activities. So now that they can take on their responsibilities, family members may feel the need to step in and take care of them, especially when they're younger. But it's important to note that these people, they still want to feel like they're in control of themselves. And when they don't allow them to feel that control, they make them feel more insecure, and just it's important to let them have control over their lives and also step in when they need or ask for the help. Unfortunately, living, dating, or befriending someone with OCD can be very exhausting and demanding. But as long as there is treatment, patience, and communication, it is possible to have relationships with someone with OCD. It is important for all involved relationships to also have support for themselves so they are able to support someone with OCD.
But of course, for all of this, we do have to like be diagnosed with a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and also they can use the DSM-5 criteria, which in this case for OCD, the criteria will be time-consuming for more than 1 hour per day. It causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning, and symptoms are not attributed to the psychological effects of a substance, so like drugs and medications.
So with all that in mind, if any of this seems familiar to you, or you felt like some of the stuff that we spoke about today, you noticed it in yourself or a loved one, please don't be afraid to look for help. I know it's sometimes a little scary to go to a medical professional right away, but there are a lot of support groups that meet online or even in person. It's just a Google search away. There's a lot of resources available, so feel free to just join a support group and see if you find that you have or experience many of the same things that the people within that group do. And if so, then go ahead and look for help. Like I said, there's a lot of treatment options available for you or for any loved one that you may have in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.